Hello everyone! In today's video, we'll delve into one of the most devastating nuclear catastrophes of the 20th century, the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This event affected the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, caused enormous environmental damage, and remains a cautionary tale about the risks associated with nuclear energy. While Chernobyl has been the subject of numerous films and documentaries, there are still many details and contexts worth revisiting. Let's explore what really happened during those fateful days and the aftermath that followed. Background and construction of the plant, the 6th Lenin nuclear power plant, commonly known as the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, was located in the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, about 15 kilometers northwest of the city of Chernobyl and around 110 kilometers from Kiev. This project was part of the Soviet Union's broader plan to expand electricity production for industry and growing urban areas. In the 1970s and 1980s, nuclear energy was seen as a modern, efficient way to meet increasing energy demands. At Chernobyl, engineers opted for RBMK reactors, in Russian, Reactor Bolshoi Moshnosti Kanalny, graphite-moderated water-cooled reactors. While these reactors could generate high power and had a relatively straightforward design, they also had critical weaknesses, such as a positive void coefficient, which ultimately played a crucial role in the disaster. The fateful event, April 26, 1986. The disaster occurred in the early hours of April 26, 1986. A safety test was underway in Reactor Unit 4 to assess whether the plant could supply power to the cooling system in the event of an external power loss. Unfortunately, the test was poorly prepared, and it began after significant delays, leading to conditions the operating staff was not fully trained or ready to handle. A combination of operator errors, including almost completely withdrawing the control rods and adjusting the coolant flow to an unusual setting, and design flaws in the RBMK reactor caused a runaway chain reaction. When staff attempted an emergency shutdown, pressing the AZ5 button, a design defect in the control rods caused the reactor's power to spike instead, resulting in an explosion. The explosion and initial response. The blast blew off the reactor's heavy steel lid, weighing hundreds of tons, releasing a massive amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The building housing the reactor was severely damaged, and large fires erupted around the facility. Firefighters from local stations were immediately dispatched, but they had no idea of the intense radiation levels, and that their standard protective gear offered insufficient shielding. The city of Pripyat, only 3 kilometers away, was constructed as a modern company town for plant employees. In the first hours after the explosion, residents had no clear sense of the catastrophe. Daily routines continued, children played outside, and adults went to work. It took many hours before an evacuation was considered. Initially, Soviet authorities sought to downplay the severity of the disaster, but soon it became evident that the extent of contamination went far beyond anyone's expectations. Evacuation and information suppression. The evacuation of Pripyat began on April 27th. Buses arrived with a terse announcement. Take only your documents and essential belongings. You'll return in 3 days. In reality, they would never come back. Afterward, authorities evacuated more villages and towns within a 30-kilometer zone around the plant. For a considerable time, the Soviet government restricted the flow of information and the true magnitude of the accident. On April 28, 1986, a nuclear facility in Sweden detected an unusual increase in radiation, which drew the world's attention to Ukraine. The Soviet leadership had no choice but to admit that a serious accident had occurred in Chernobyl. It soon emerged that this was the worst reactor accident in the history of civilian nuclear power. Liquidators and mitigating the consequences. In the immediate aftermath, firefighting and containment operations started, involving soldiers and specialized units later referred to as liquidators. Their task was to reduce the radioactive threat as quickly as possible and temporarily seal off the reactor and surrounding areas. Without these efforts, the contamination could have spread even more extensively. One of the most perilous assignments was removing highly radioactive graphite and fuel fragments from the building rooftops near the reactor, often called hot spots. Initially, robots were deployed, but they frequently malfunctioned under the intense radiation. Ultimately, bio-robots, the nickname for soldiers clad in heavy protective gear, were sent in. They had only seconds to fling pieces of graphite and debris into the ruined reactor core and retreat before receiving a lethal dose of radiation. The sarcophagus and long-term effects. By late 1986, a concrete sarcophagus had been constructed over the destroyed reactor to contain further radioactive releases. However, it was only a temporary solution and gradually began to deteriorate. Consequently, the new safe confinement structure, a massive steel arch, was built and completed in 2019, covering the old sarcophagus and Reactor 4. In terms of casualties, dozens of people died within the first days or weeks from acute radiation sickness, and hundreds or thousands more suffer long-term effects, such as an increased risk of cancers. Northern Ukraine and Belarus were especially affected, with thousands of square kilometers contaminated. This area became known as the exclusion zone, where human habitation largely ceased, allowing nature to reclaim the land. Today, abandoned towns are home to diverse wildlife populations. Human error and design defects investigations revealed that the Chernobyl disaster resulted from a mix of human error and technical flaws in the RBMK reactor. Staff violated multiple safety protocols, and the reactor itself had critical vulnerabilities, particularly its tendency for a sudden power surge under specific conditions. When operators tried to shut down the reactor in its critical state, the reactivity briefly spiked instead, triggering the explosion. The catastrophe underscored the insufficient safety culture in the Soviet nuclear industry, a lack of independent oversight, and an over-reliance on a technology that had not been comprehensively stress-tested for severe scenarios. Legacy and lessons for the future. Chernobyl stands as a stark warning of nuclear power's potential risks and the consequences of sidelining safety measures or hiding crucial information. After the disaster, international nuclear safety standards were strengthened, and data-sharing mechanisms, like those managed by the IEA, were established to alert the global community of radiological incidents. Public debate also shifted significantly. Many people became staunchly opposed to nuclear energy. Some countries scaled back their atomic programs, while others invested in modernization and more stringent testing. Still, nuclear power remains one of the largest sources of low-carbon electricity worldwide, making its use a complex issue. It offers high energy efficiency on the one hand, but demands rigorous safety procedures and long-term solutions for nuclear waste on the other. A lasting warning. The explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant remains emblematic of human mistakes and the immense power of nuclear energy when it isn't managed with utmost care. Although decades have passed since the event, its impacts linger, not just in the physical form of the exclusion zone, but also in our collective memory. We must ask ourselves, are we willing and able to learn from history so that such a disaster never happens again?